Greetings, Wildcats. I am going to go over just a few assignments that you will be completing this week for your government class. All in all, we have 3 assignments to complete this week. We will be focusing on monetary and fiscal policy, which is basically where does our government get its money from, and how and why does the government spend its money on certain items. So you'll have 3 assignments this week. I'm going to briefly go over them with you just in case you have any, concerns. And of course, feel free to reach out to me via email if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns. The first assignment you will be completing this week will be lecture and notes. So all you have to do is open up this lecture that I created for you all, and then be sure to attach a copy of notes that you've taken via Google Docs. So with this week's lecture, again, we're discussing monetary and fiscal policies, but here are some of our intricate goals that we're going to be hitting on. So by the end of this week's lessons, you should be able to tell me the difference between expansionary and contractionary policies. We'll be hitting really hard on fixed spending programs and discretionary spending programs and our budget. Whew, I know that sounds like a lot, but I promise when we get through this, you will be able to nail this. Okay, so before I hop into the lecture a little bit, your budgeting act, which if you would like to pull up, kind of covers the discretionary and fixed policies that we're going to be talking about in our lecture this week. So before you even do this activity, I need you to complete this lecture, and that's why I have it in this order: lecture, activity, and then not so pop quiz. So what is our budget? Where do we get our money from? And what does this look like? Well, basically, we have a budget for how we spend our money every year. And this is the reason why we have a government. The government's primary goal is to make sure that we have a functioning economy, and that our people have, the economic security they need to, pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So basically, who makes our budget? Well, our president and his cabinet makes the budget, they create it, and then they send it off to the legislative branch. Let me make this a little bigger for you all. There we go. How are the goals of our government reflected in the budget? Well, it's basically dependent upon who is in office. So if we have a very conservative administration in office, we're probably going to see a lot more money spent on military. So what is revenue? Revenue is basically the money that we take in. For example, if you have a part-time job and you make money, the money that you get from your paycheck is your revenue. And so the revenue in our budget primarily comes from taxes. So when we are spending as much money as we are making, then we have a balanced budget, and that's good. We always want a balanced budget. For example, if you work at Wendy's and you make $150 a week, but you just spent $200 on a pair of Yeezys, are you in the positive or are you in the green? Or I'm sorry, are you in the positive or are you in the negative? You are in the negative because you spent $50 more than you made, and that's not good. That's called debt, and we never want to be in debt. However, if you made $300 at Wendy's this week and you spent $200 in Yeezys, that is called a budget surplus, and that is good. That means you have $100 left over, you're in the green, and you have money to save, and that's good. A deficit is where you are spending more than you are making, and that's not good. That's not what we want. A little bit about national debt. There have been times in our history where we, especially, recently and really just throughout history, where we have spent more money than we have brought in, and this is called national debt. We don't want a lot of national debt. We want to save our money, which means we don't want to spend, to be honest, we don't even want to spend as much as we are getting in revenue. We want to save to pay off that debt. So what does our budget process look like? Well, it's kind of odd when you first look at it. For example, the fiscal year that we're going through right now begins in October and ends on September 30th. So the money that we're spending right now in our government here in May, we planned for in October. This is called fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is when we are calculating how much money our government is bringing in through taxes, and then spending that revenue on certain expenditures to make sure people can live a life full of happiness and security. For example, like our national parks and education and stuff like that. So, anyway, I digress. Our budget typically, not typically, it always starts with our executive branch, and then, which is our president. And then once our president and his cabinet have written out the budget, they'll send it to Congress. They kind of work together. Um, because this is in our Constitution, that the Congress must approve of all federal spending. Once Congress approves of that, or maybe they say, hey, you need to make changes to this area, they'll send it back to the president, and then they just kind of like work together, and if they don't agree, then they just kind of keep sending revisions back and forth until they do. Once this budget is put into place, they have to track their expenditures and revenues. So how much they're spending, expenditures, how much they're spending, and then revenues, how much they're bringing in. And Congress does have a right to check our budget. So for example, if we said we were only going to spend 6.1 trillion this year on government expenditures and we're spending more than that, Congress can step in and check that. Here is a quick infographic of what this budget process looks like. Again, the departments of the cabinet kind of come together and say, hey, Mr. President, this is how much we would like to spend this year. He creates a budget, he sends it to Congress. Congress kind of works it out. Maybe they don't want as much in agriculture and they want more in education. I don't know. It depends on the values of the people that we elect in office. And then they will send it back to the president, and the president will either say, okay, this looks great, or he will make changes, send it back to Congress, and it just kind of keeps going back and forth until they all agree. Okay, federal spending. So what are some fixed spending programs? This is one of our big goals that we're hitting on this week. Well, for example, a fixed spending that we need to have in our budget are called uncontrollables. So for example, national debt. So when we are creating a budget, we cannot control, it's an uncontrollable, how much we spend on national debt. We don't get to negotiate that. We need to pay off our debt. Another fixed spending program are called entitlements. So these are people who are entitled to certain revenues for the government. For example, people who receive Social Security, or if you worked for the government, you are entitled to that retirement money. People who receive Medicare and Medicaid and veteran budgets, I apologize. These are all entitlements. These people are entitled to these expenditures, and this is not something, this is a fixed spending program. This is something we have to put in our budget. I know this probably sounds like a lot, but I think once you all hop into your activity this week, it will make a little more sense. Lastly, besides our uncontrollables and our entitlements, we also have what is called discretionary spending. And again, this is another huge topic that we're hitting on this week. Discretionary spending is basically thought of two categories. It's either defense or non-defense spending. And fun fact, did you know that for our fiscal year, our budget was approved for $4.47 trillion, and out of that, we spent $639 billion in defense. That's a lot of money. Examples of non-defense spending, which you will see in the activities this week, are like national parks, education, NASA, highways, things like that. Things that don't relate to like our military or defense. Here is a really great infographic that kind of outlines, discretionary spending, defense, non-defense, and then our entitles like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then our other, which would be our uncontrollables like debt. The last part of the lecture that we're going to go through is monetary versus fiscal policy. We already covered fiscal policy. Fiscal policy are the expenditures and revenues that are determined in our budget. So you already have that down. Monetary policy is not focused more so on the government more than the Federal Reserve, which is not a part of the government. Basically, monetary policy is how much money do we have out in our system. So the Federal Reserve is actually in control of, how much money banks have to give loans for businesses, and cars and education and all that jazz. The Federal Reserve is divided into 12 districts. And these districts, I have a little map right here that kind of outlines that. But we are in District 4 here in Ohio, and we are actually at the Capitol. Our Federal Reserve District is here in Cleveland, Ohio. Basically, so what does our federal district do? So for this portion of district, which is a part of also Kentucky and Pennsylvania, they basically control inflation. So for example, if there's too much money in the system, they will stop giving out so much money to banks for loans and all that jazz, and they encourage full employment. So basically, the Federal Reserve, which again is not a part of the government, it is strictly monetary policy. They are basically in charge of supplying money and clearing checks, making sure that your money is backed by your bank. Another huge pointer that we're going to hit on this week is the difference between contractionary and expanding policies. Basically, I have two little charts here that kind of describe it. But contractionary policy is when we are going through like a time of inflation in our country. Maybe we, our dollar isn't worth as much and we have too much money in the system. And so contractionary policy is kind of trying to bring that in. When you contract something, you're bringing it in. So they're trying to like reel in our economy. And then expansionary policy is when we're actually in a process of expansionary policy right now because we have a lot of unemployment, and that's why we had stimulus checks that were like put out to people. So basically, like, interest rates will be lowered, or maybe they will extend like how much money you will have to spend on, or not spend, but to pay off a loan, things like that. So expansion is when we're trying to expand money out into the country, and then contractionary is when we're trying to bring it in. And then we already went over fiscal policy, but if you are a visual learner like I am, I highly recommend you watch this thought bubble between this time. It kind of gives a good walkthrough of what the difference between monetary and fiscal policy are. And then here is how contractionary and expansionary policy, works. Just to give you a quick example, so taxes and government spending, contraction, so we're trying to reel money in. We might increase taxes and lower spending. We want to bring in more revenue, and we want to limit what we're spending money on so that we can have more in our savings and not so much in debt. And then obviously vice versa with expansionary. So this is the lecture that I have for you this week. When you are done with your lecture, then you complete your notes and turn those in for a grade. You can go ahead and move on to our activity, which is super fun. You are creating your own budget. So I gave you a Google Doc where you have to answer these questions for the activity. You can work with someone, just make sure you all turn in your own work. And then you'll open up this link. And so this is an example, if you had your own budget for the government, what would it look like? So basically, these are our revenues. This is where the government gets its money. And then these are the expenditures. This is where we can't spend it. Fun fact, so if we remember, what is an incontrollable? What is something that we can't control, that we always, have to spend money on in our budget? and that is our interest. And so when you go over here to look at this stuff, you'll see that the interest is set. So again, it's locked. Interest is an uncontrollable. That is an amount of money that we always have to spend. So basically what you're going to do is you are going to balance our budget. Right now our budget is at negative 487 billion. That is bad. That is really bad. I hope you never have that much debt in your life. Basically, you want to make sure that we are in the green. So we might have some expansionary policies where we'll need to, like, raise our revenue so that we can spend less on our expenditures and all that jazz. So basically what you're going to do to balance your budget is, we might have to have some expansionary policies where we raise taxes on the 1%, like, Bill Gates and all that jazz. So as you can see, this is just an example. You don't have to do this, but as we are raising taxes, as we are raising our revenue, we are slowly bringing this down. And then you might also cut some things in your expenditures. Remember, interest is an uncontrollable. We can't really do anything with that. But with our discretionary funding, maybe, we could cut back on defense, because defense is actually one of the more expensive things that we spend our money on. For example, maybe this is a personal value. Again, these are reflected in our budget. Maybe you're not a huge fan of nuclear weapons, so you can get rid of that. So basically you're just doing everything you can to bring this down here. And there's no right or wrong answer for how much you raise or cut in revenues or expenditures. Those are your personal values. So when you're done, when you have your budget in green, you'll go over here and you'll complete these questions. For example, what are the 4 revenues of our government? Oh, they're right here. How about that? And then what are the 11 expenditures? Oh, they're right here. So it's super easy. As you can see, they're only 2.5 points apiece. But then when you are done, I want you to tell me, when you balance your budget, what tax revenue brought in the most money for you. Maybe you'll go over here and you'll find that you raised taxes on gas, or maybe tobacco and alcohol. And maybe you'll find that this is where you brought in the most money. And so, you'll tell me right here which expenditures cost the most. So this is pretty self-explanatory. You just complete the questions, and when you're done, turn it in for a grade. The last thing we'll be doing this week is having a not-so-pop quiz. It's just, a few questions. I believe there's 10 or 15 questions that just kind of go over what we've done this week. Remember, when you when you do your quiz, you are doing it by yourself, and your computer will be locked. So good luck this week. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. Please feel free to reach out to me, through email, or you can leave a comment on here. And yeah, that's all I have for you. Be safe, be smart, and I will see you on Google Meet this week.